Let's face it, being reincarnated as an otome game villainess is never really easy, but how about having it happen in a world filled with vampires, werewolves, and vengeful spirits that want to eliminate your entire bloodline? Hello everybody and welcome to this light novel review. I'm Justus R. Stone and my channel is all about light novels. I'm really here to try and help you find a light novel series to love, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you can keep up with all of my future light novel content. And stay tuned till later in the video. If you like the sound of this book that I'm going to be discussing, or you've already read it, I'm going to have a couple of recommendations of other series that you might want to check out as well. So in this video, I am going to be reviewing volume number 1 of Deathbound Duke's Daughter, Erika Aurelia and the Seafarer's Ruins. This one is written by Terasu Seno, with illustrations by Munashichi. It's released officially in English by Java Novel Club, with a translation by Roy Nukia. If you want to pick up your own copy of this one, I've got links in the description down below. Deathbound Duke's Daughter is, of course, an isekai otome villainess type light novel. The main character, Erika Aurelia, realizes when she turns 8 that she has the memories of her previous life. A previous life in which she was a Japanese woman who was stabbed to death by a co-worker who was, well, essentially stalking her and had it twisted in his head that she had loved him and spurned him. Erika also comes to the realization that in that previous life, she was playing a game, Liber Monstrorum, that seems really similar to the world that she's currently living in. Not only that, but the person, Erika Aurelia, was a villain character in said otome game, and in fact her death early on in the game set off many of the game's different events. To which Erika decides, well, I'm just going to avoid my death flags. I'm going to live a nice, quiet, peaceful life, be nice to people, maybe get a cat, live in the country, you know, the typical things. Until she's told that the very next day, another noble family from another kingdom are going to be arriving, and their kids are Klaus and Anne. Erika realizes that this is actually about to set off an event that will eventually lead to one of her death flags, and so she does her best to try and avoid said event, but unfortunately, fate has its way, and the kids that she's done her best to try and keep from going to the Seafarer Ruins from the title, well, of course, they end up there. And so Erika decides to take it upon herself to rescue them, and we find ourselves in a dungeon diving adventure novel. I actually really enjoyed this book. It feels quite a bit different from the typical otome villainous, or even just otome in general, light novel that we've currently had in English. By the end, this book feels a lot more like the kind of action-adventure kid movies that we had back in the 80s, like The Goonies, or even sort of those classic adventure novels like Treasure Island and such. Even taking a look at the cover artwork, which I have to say, I think the art is really beautiful in this book and very stylistically in line with the world and the themes. Even the artwork on the cover, unlike typical light novels that very prominently feature the characters, this one is a full scene from the book. Really impactful, and in fact, probably one of the main things that drew me to wanting to read this book in the first place. And in some ways, that cover is really symbolic of what makes this light novel feel different and have some particular strengths that I would feel a lot of, particularly otome-type light novels, have neglected. Point number 1, and probably the most obvious, is the world building in this book. There is 2 magic systems. We have magic and then we have alchemy. I won't get into the specifics, but they are quite different, even though they do share some similarities. And they are pretty well thought out, and yet they function within this world. We also have, of course, a full political system being discussed, the whole point of this meeting between the fathers of Erika and Klaus and Anne is political. Those Seafarer's ruins, we discover, actually date back to when the people who currently live on this land first arrived. So you actually get sort of an origin story for this continent. So there's a lot of world building going on in this book. And the other thing is, of course, Erika herself is a character. Now, I've already told you, Erika has a pretty bad backstory. She wasn't some happy-go-lucky gamer girl who got hit by a truck or, fell out of a tree or whatever, some such thing. She has a really horrific end to her life. And in fact, that's not even the first time that she was seriously injured by a man mistaking her intentions and her feelings for him. Back in high school, that happened to her as well, and she was hospitalized for an extensive amount of time. We actually find out that, unlike a lot of other otome game or isekai in general characters, she really wasn't like an otaku. She didn't really get into otome gaming because of this geek desire. It was because it gave her sort of an outlet for relationships that were safe. It allowed her to interact with people and social situations that she didn't have to worry that they were misinterpreting anything. She didn't have to feel like, she could get hurt by this. So we actually have a character that has a very different feel to her right away. And bring her into this world now, and it's kind of sad, really, that she blames herself for what happened to her. Unlike a lot of other otome games, particularly otome game light novels where the main character is a villain, she actually liked the villainess Erika Aurelia. She thought that Erika was strong and determined, and she kind of admired the fact that no one would ever mistake what Erika thought or Erika felt. She was like, all those men who hurt me because I couldn't be clear, because I couldn't be confident in who I was and what I was thinking and what I was feeling, Erika would never be that person. It sucks that she was kind of a, bitch to people, and I don't like that part per se, but in terms of her strength, Erika was, she was admired her. So we actually have our character, she is reincarnated as a villainess, and she's kind of like glad about it because she's like, this is, I get to be this person that I kind of admired. But the differences don't just end there. In a lot of otome type books like this, especially when the main character is a villainess, a lot of effort is dedicated to protecting their life in this game world, protecting this new life that they have. Erika has a much different viewpoint on the whole thing. Yes, she is interested in not dying. Yes, she is interested in staying alive. But when Anne and Klaus are in danger, even though she's basically cleared the death flag, she just can't live with the idea that she's had this bonus time. She's had 8 years of life that she shouldn't have had. 8 years where she spent time with a loving family and pampered, taken care of. She's like, I've already had 8 bonus years. These kids, this is their only life. This is their only life to live, and they should be able to live it. So we have a main character who is kind of like willing to sacrifice herself above and beyond just sort of the norm. It's an intentional thing. It's not like I'm just going to act heroic and maybe I'll get hurt. It is like I'm willing to die for this. It was also kind of cool to see like a otome game main character act with determination. When Erika finds out that these kids have ended up at the Seafarer's ruins, something she had tried to have avoid, she takes advantage of her brother's kindness and basically steals a crap ton of his spells and tools and everything else. Even goes so far as to steal one of his old outfits that's from when he was a kid so that she doesn't have to go adventuring in a dungeon in a dress. So she's very willful and she's very determined and she's willing to do what needs to get done. And even when something bad happens to her in the dungeon, she's kind of like, well, it is what it is, you know? There's none of this blubbering, there's none of this horror or anything. Like Erika seems kind of numb in a lot of ways, and it makes her feel quite different than a lot of other otome game light novel characters. And of course, the bulk of the book is a dungeon diver, so it's much more action-oriented, and the relationships, unlike, say, you know, and don't get me wrong, I really love My Next Life as a Villainess. I really do. But in that book, everybody fell in love with Katerina within like 20 pages. We actually get this relationship building between Klaus and Anne and Erika throughout the entirety of this book. When the book ends, you can kind of see where they've become close. They've become friends. You can see where Klaus, as a very serious-minded young man, has sort of awakened to his first childhood crush. Like, it makes sense because of what they've gone through together. Not to mention that even the threat that they face within the Seafarer's ruins is very different. It is not just some malevolent monster who is evil for the purpose of evil. It's very different and very spoilerish, so I won't get into it. But all in all, like, this was one of those books that I just found incredibly readable. It's got a great pace to it. I liked the characters in it, and it was, because it's much more of like just an adventure novel, like it really kept driving itself forward. And there was not like that kind of repeating over and over again of meet the character, do something nice for them, they love me, move on to the next character. That didn't happen in this book. So all in all, you know, Deathbound Duke's Daughter was a lot of fun. You know, it doesn't break the mold. It doesn't do anything that I would say is like, you know, awe-inspiring. That's probably why I didn't give it like perfect marks, but I would give this, I like on Goodreads, I gave it a 4 out of 5. I mean, I was thinking more of like a 4.5 almost, just for the pure enjoyment of it and because of what it did that was different. Just a lot of fun, this series. I'm kind of saddened because apparently there's only 2 volumes that have been released so far. But I believe somebody had said that the web novel's gone quite a ways beyond those. I'm kind of hoping that if this one does well in English, there will be sort of a drive to bring more of that stuff out in print, because, man, I really enjoyed this book. It was fun. It's something that's kind of different compared to a lot of other light novels that we have. I mean, like I said, like a lot of other light novels that are dungeon divers are a bit more serious, or they're harem-y or whatever. This one, it's like kids just adventuring and getting into crazy stuff, which, you know, again, I grew up in the 80s. We had lots of movies like that. Maybe that is why I feel particularly attached to this. But I think it just works on a lot of good levels. And I thought that Erika was a really good protagonist that I would be very interested in checking out. And I do want to mention there's 2 short stories after sort of the main action of the book have finished. Unlike a lot of light novels where those stories are usually just throwaways that you're kind of like, whatever. The one serves very much as kind of like an epilogue in terms of like Anne and Klaus when they've gone back home. And then the other is told from Erika's brother's point of view. And it is kind of cool because it gives us a very different impression of both him and of Erika. It's one of the few times that I didn't just kind of be like, yeah, okay, it's nice and all, but whatever. It was one of those few times where you read those short stories put at the end and you're kind of like, wow, I'm really glad that I read these because it actually added to the characters and added to the story overall. So some high marks for that as well. So as you can tell, I really enjoyed Deathbound Duke's Daughter, volume number 1. I do recommend it if you're looking for something that's like a really cool kind of swashbuckling adventure type story with some cool dungeon mechanics and, like I said, a lot of actually really decent world building and magic systems building as well. In this video, I want to say a special thanks to Renzos, Jonathan McCabe, Drone205, and VixLab.com for their support on Patreon, as well as the support of all of my patrons who help the channel run, help me to keep hosting the Light Novel Podcast so we can be on as many platforms as possible, and just helping me with other projects that are going on, such as EnglishLightNovels.com, which is a website that I run that has a ton of information on all the light novels that are currently available in English. Now, I struggled a little bit thinking about recommendations for this one because, honestly, there's not a lot of light novels that I've read that or know of that are a lot like this one. So I came up with two, kind of approaching it from different angles. One of them, I'm actually going to say a thanks to Microwavy, who they talked about this on a previous video of mine in the comments, and that was The Epic Tale of Prince Hersherik. This one is from J Novel Club, and it's also a isekai title about a Japanese woman who is reincarnated, but as a young prince, but a little bit similar in that fact that the book takes place when the prince is still a child, but is surrounded by all sorts of danger on all sides, corruption in the kingdom and everything else, and trying to use the knowledge from their previous life in order to try and fix and solve the kingdom. And so Microwavy was saying, kind of similar in fact that the main character is still a child, there's lots of adventure, and that it has a bit more of a serious tone to it than a lot of other sort of otome type games like this one. As I said, Deathbound Duke's Daughter, much more of a serious adventure action type light novel. And then the other one was to come at this from a female character going into dungeons and kicking ass, and that was Reincarnated as a Sword. Now this one's going to have a really different feel to Deathbound Duke's Daughter, and like I said, it's maybe stretching things a little bit, but the main character, we could argue, is a dude reincarnated as a sword. Funny thing. But he is wielded by a young cat girl named Fran. And there is dungeon diving and fighting monsters and demons and all that kind of stuff. So a very different book, like I said. But, at the same time, determined female characters, kicking ass, taking names. This one pretty kind of much fits the bill. So for my next review, funny enough, I'm going to be talking about a female adventurer kicking ass and taking names. The big difference in this one is that she's dressed in a cuddly bear onesie. So that's going to be Kuma Bear, volume number 1. That'll be my next review. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining me in this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Till then, bye-bye for now.